Okay, so we will have a very open talk.
Sure.
They are
Yep.
not strict questions. I will,
Yes.
as I mentioned to you, my topic is archive. So
Yes,
I'm
yep.
interested on that. And
Yes, you can ask me any.
yeah,
any
exactly,
questions
exactly. I can tell you so far what type of struggles I had. I'm at the end of the PhD, so I don't look much for digging inside the type of documentations, for example,
Yes.
how different institutions are using different systems for archiving. This for me is done.
Yeah.
Each institution has their own approach. So right now I'm much more interested on the perspective of the artist,
Okay.
and
Yep.
especially in your case, it's
Yep.
a performing art,
Yes.
which is completely impossible for archiving because it's a work with your body,
Yes.
and usually it's typical practice that performing artists are making documentation that they sell. So we can start from that point, like how much you accept this practice. Do you do it?
Yeah.
What do you think
Well, I
about it?
think it's always been difficult for performance art because performance is ephemeral. Museums don't like to pay the artist very much because it's ephemeral. On the other hand, they don't want to give much value to documentation because the documentation is not the actual performance. Usually images and video are not highly valued as artworks in themselves
Yes.
because they're seen as documentation. They're not seen as the actual artwork. The performer isn't a photographer, isn't considered a visual artist. And performance is not part of the kind of art economy, because museums and galleries can't collect, and there are no objects to collect as such. And even with my performance objects like the third hand, the extended arm, the six-legged walking robot, nothing has been purchased. Although the Pompidou Centre is interested in the third hand and perhaps will acquire it. Because these objects are really emblematic of my performances, and for me they're beautiful objects in themselves.
Yeah.
And they were state-of-the-art engineering, for example, when they were completed. So it's very difficult in terms of the art market or the art economy, that performance is not collectible in a kind of valued way. It's, to sell photographs or videos, there's not so much money in that. Although one Singapore collector recently purchased 2 videotapes, and for the first time at a meaningful value for the artist, $30,000 for each edited tape of 3 or 4 minutes each. So that was very encouraging, but that's been the only time.
Yeah.
But the third hand, the extended arm, the six-legged walking robot, the walking head robot, none of those have been sold, and they're now in boxes and no one sees them, and the artist doesn't achieve any value for his work.
But let's go back then to the tapes, like what he is buying then. He's buying the recorders, right? The records on the tapes.
Yes.
On one hand, the tape is an object. On second hand, the content is the performance, right?
Well, of course, what he's purchasing is a digital version.
Okay.
You know, it's not a physical videotape, it's a digital file. And what I did was I did a special edit of the performance for him. So he has that only edit. And also I colour graded the video. So it has a different feeling, a different visual recommendation.
Was this the box?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I don't think so, because this looks like the system
Yeah,
from
this
the...
is more like the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is the only box I found inside.
Yeah, it's
And
not
he
that
said
box. Oh.
But there were this kind of stuff. So.
I don't know, to be honest.
The microphones are
It-
from us or from the Goethe Institute?
This is
Venelin,
Venko's.
No, the microphones, because this here is from there. Maybe these microphones are from Goethe.
yeah, that's what I think
Yeah.
also.
Yeah, I have read about another type of selling performance. Unfortunately, I can't recall right now the name of the artist. Of course, he is very famous. He sold the way how the people should make the performance, and then he is selling the documentation of the performing action, and each museum that is purchasing the piece can hire people,
Yeah.
educate them, train them, and they can do the performance.
And this
Have
is
you ever
a-
think
yeah.
about this?
But this is a different kind of performance.
Mm-hmm.
And with most of my performances, they're only performed once or twice. They're very difficult performances involving technology, involving this particular body. So, for example, the exoskeleton arm for the rewired performance, it only fits my arm. Because it's completely articulated, and if anybody else tries to wear it and use it, they might damage their fingers or...
Yeah.
So it's not, these projects cannot be archived as just a plan to do a performance. And the other problem is that, for example, the fractal flesh performance, where people in other places were able to remotely activate my body in Luxembourg, or the ping body or parasite performances, the software is obsolete, the hardware is obsolete. If I was to do that performance again, the software would have to be completely rewritten for the present day operating system and the present day hardware. So it's a problem with this kind of situation. So the software programming, the interactivity, it's difficult to you could archive it if you had the original, but it wouldn't be operational anymore.
Exactly.
For example, my prosthetic head project, I don't know if you're familiar with that, it's the talking head, which somewhat resembles the artist. And this has been purchased by several collectors and galleries, but the way that I presented this project was not on a disc with the program, because it's not a plug-and-play system. It had to be, they had to purchase the artwork in the laptop. So they have the original laptop with the original operating system, with the original software and plugins. And so we designed that as soon as they turn on the laptop, the talking head program appears, and all they have to do is to connect to a projector, and they have to project this 5 meters high. It's a very large head. But it means that by purchasing the laptop with the embedded program and software and plugins, then you can have that, and it's operational as long as the laptop
Yes.
is still,
Yeah.
alive.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, this is exactly
If the
one-
laptop malfunctions or the hard drive dies, then unfortunately the artwork does also.
disappear.
Yeah, and recently we did a kind of an update, because the original prosthetic head was done in a way hands-on. It was a 12,000 polygon mesh, and we photoshopped a skin using images of my face, and then we wrapped this skin around the polygon mesh and produced a kind of handmade thing. But now you can scan someone's head and produce hyperreal skin. And this is what we did this time. But we couldn't use the original software. We couldn't use the original kind of database. So we had to build a new software engine.
Yeah.
And to be honest, this is not necessarily better than the original. The 3D model is better, but the animation of the lips and the facial expressions, I think, were still better in the original. So even if you try to update the project, it's a completely new project. You cannot just simply update and replicate.
Yeah.
There are new problems with new operating systems. For example, the text-to-speech engine. The text-to-speech engine in the original allowed my head to make song-like sounds. It could make interesting, because of that particular text-to-speech engine. But that's now become obsolete, and the recent text-to-speach engine, that capability is not possible. And so we lost a really creative aspect of the prosthetic head project. So this new prosthetic head, or this new articulated head, which is now a monitor connected to a robot arm, it's already being exhibited, but I'm not satisfied with all the operational components and software, and this will have to be updated and improved again. But yeah, it's a real problem to archive digital media, and especially interactive media, because the technology becomes obsolete so quickly. In 5 years' time, new operating systems, new video cards, different kinds of flash memory. You have to do things differently.
Yeah.
It's like you have to continuously update
Yeah.
if you want your archive to really last for a long time.
Well, this is a double-faced solution, because one of the paradoxes of the archive is the urge to archive everything.
Yes.
And sometimes do you think that it's really necessary to archive everything?
Well,
Of
of course,
everything.
one can argue that certain artworks will not be perpetuated indefinitely, you know. You will have some video documentation that is more easily represents the work, but to archive...
Може ли само да помоля да го включиш, ще се изключи?
Кое?
Да.
Само да ти кажа, че
Да?
оставам хард диска, за да го дадеш на Иван.
Добре, супер.
Карт, предполагам, че
Пълна е
пише
картата вече.
full, да.
Окей. Ти взе ли си тази от моя лаптоп?
Взех, че тя утре ще ми
Да, разбира се. Добре.
Goodbye. It was
Значи тази се е напълнила.
And,
А имаш ли някаква празна, която можеш да ми дадеш за тук? Не, че до вечера не идваш. Добре.
No, that's
Ай,
okay.
чао, много ти благодаря.
I can imagine. I mean, I'm exhausted too. Okay, have fun in Skopje and
Yes.
a good trip back because it's long.
Let's keep in touch. And
Oh, sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for everything.
no, it's been wonderful coming here. Thank you so much, Shirley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Петя, ще се видим после
В
чашки.
The Science. Да. We'll continue. This card is full, so
Yes.
I will overlap with pictures from the
that's right.
events.
Yeah.
So
And
Let's-
so you would like some images for me to send you?
no, it's not necessary.
Not necessary?
Yeah,
You sure?
Yeah, absolutely. If I find something that will go well with the talk,
Yeah, no, you
I
should
can.
tell me.
In the site I will ask you, can I use this in this picture?
Yeah.
But I don't need like super high quality stuff. Yeah. Well, my hypothesis in my dissertation is a little bit focused on the concept of collective memory. What you said, I had a talk with Alexander Hansen, rest in peace, about does it necessarily really to archive everything, and he mentioned that V2 in Rotterdam is
Yes.
almost not archiving stuff anymore because it's also up to the artist to decide and somehow to give a solution to the institutions how exactly and to what extent the archive can happen, like how important is for the artist to this work to be archived or not. And from my research perspective, the collective memory is something like building in this, let's say, relatively new field, because your field of work, your field of art is relatively new. I think that the collective can help a lot to make a good building history different from the Nietzsche perspective, right? Not the history that we need to forget, but history that we need to remember.
Yes.
The one that have to abstain.
Yes.
So I see the public as a very big actor in this process of archiving, because if they don't participate, then we go in this struggle which you just explained, right? We need to all the time update. We have to face the problem with the obsolescence. We have to face the technical problem of only you fitting in your pieces. And at the end, we also have to face the problem of having a, let's say, broken art piece, because
I think, you know, for example, performance art is not music that you can write instructions and other people perform it. I think this is highly problematic, and Marina Abramovich's exhibition at Museum of Contemporary Art in New York, they decided not only to show some images, but rather to ask other people to perform her original. But you know, this is, I think, just a bad representation. You know, because there is no historical context. The particular body of the artist gives an authentic presence, and if it's someone else, they're just acting. You know, they're not performing in the visual arts sense. It's more approaching theatrical performance rather than performing in the visual arts. So I think it's highly problematic. But I was saying in the workshop that it's interesting when you can capture your performance or your action in one image. I mean, images and video we can archive much more easily, right?
Yes.
So if you can encapsulate, like for example, writing with 3 hands, right? One image, in a sense, represents the performance very adequately.
But still from the third side, not from first side. It represents the performance frontward, not from your perspective.
Yes, but I mean, art is not for the artist, you know?
Yeah, so
It's-
your
it's-
point is that maybe what they see is what should be archived, if I get it correct.
Well, no, how the artist frames
Okay,
the performance.
okay.
You know, because often, you know, one of the big problems now is everyone has a camera, everyone has a, you know, phone. And in some of my performances, I'm not strict about people taking photographs. But someone takes a bad image and then they post it online, and that represents your performance, you know. And what is archived online is rarely removed, you know. One of the problems of digital archiving online in the internet is there's no digital forgetting, you know.
Well,
so for example,
there
you know,
is try for that, right? Michaela Lakova work is
yeah, I mean,
based on that.
you know,
What is
there
the
are,
new law?
yeah, I mean, there are
Yeah.
people working towards
Yeah.
this, and there are people who say that digital forgetting is very important. Not
Snapchat
only,
is doing
yeah,
this also.
Yeah, yeah. You can either specify a particular time or automatically the image appears and disappears, you know. But it's very frustrating. For example, a lot of what I do and a lot of... there's no time stamping. When something is posted on the internet,
Yeah.
maybe in some sections, but there's no time stamping. So people, for example, quote the artist, and it's something the artist said 45 years ago.
Yes, this is true.
And people are doing PhDs as if I said this yesterday,
yeah.
and it doesn't represent my present thinking. And the same with representations of my artwork, because my friends post images of my performances, and they're terrible images because they're not framed as the artist wishes the performance to be seen. And in terms of the audience, how the audience can be best educated for that performance. So it's a big problem when sometimes when art festivals print a catalogue, you know. The catalogue actually is printed after the opening, and the organisers take some photographs of your installation or your performance, and then 1 month later they print the catalogue. And I'm always happy when they check with me, oh, which images do you want to use?
Yeah.
Because if they use their own images and they don't really understand how to frame what's important, you know. For example, in Ping Body, Fractal Flesh and Parasite, the third hand is not the most important thing. What's important is the remote choreography, the interaction of other people, but they're not really understanding the concept of the artist and how the artist should frame the work, and they're just randomly. So then you have an archive of the artwork that is inadequately documented.
This is in the case when we don't see the artwork separated from the artist. There are some examples of artworks that exist completely away from the author, right?
Yes, yeah.
The artist makes it and leave it to the public,
Yes.
that the public develops and
Yes.
so on. So maybe what you are saying is very important to be aware for the piece of art, what type of piece of art it is. Is it a moving artistic picture that the author is presenting with the instrument of their bodies or their voice or some other media? Or it's a piece of art that is to be living on its own?
Yes.
So I will bring you back to the tapes that you said that you actually edited,
Yes.
because for me it sounds interesting. Your action of editing, it already can be seen as a digital performance.
Oh, of course. But any video editing is going to be a compression, of the performance, because the edit might be 3 or 4 minutes, but the performance was 1 hour, or the performance was 5 days, 6 hours every day, and it's unusual to record, 5 days, 6 hours every day of documentation. But if the artist edits the video, the artist is able to choose what is meaningful, what is how to frame the performance.
So
Because
in
if
that-
you're a painter, if you're a sculptor, you're making an artwork, but it's finished when it goes into the gallery. With a performance, it happens live in real time, and then the documentation is a record of that live performance.
But in your case, how you explained it, for me, it will be even easier to see it as a second piece of art.
Yes.
Not something that is divided from the original,
Yes.
but something that is separate as a second original of some action that you did.
Yes, and I mean, for example, the suspension
Is
events.
it too much?
The suspension events?
Yes.
I did 27, 28, 29 suspension events. Most of them are documented as postcards. Black and white postcards, an image on one side and the information on the other side. And this was a convenient way of documenting and disseminating the performance, So if the performance was a strong performance, if the performance was documented well as a still image, this is a strong representation of what happened. I mean, you saw some of the individual images of the suspension performances, for example, which were done in remote locations, private gallery spaces, except for the New York suspension and the Copenhagen suspension. They weren't public performances, But one postcard image with some information on the back was enough to convey the impact of the performance, the essence of the performance. So I think sometimes it's not so important what kind of documentation. If the conceptual raison d'etre of the performance is strong, then whether it's one image or a 3-minute videotape, that's adequate. But certainly none of my performances that involved software, that involved interactivity, except for the very recent ones, you would have to rewrite everything. You could not use the original software unless you were able to obtain the original hardware.
Yeah. But right now it's very typical to downgrade techniques, so to be able to use it or to emulate. Of course, the archives are using a lot emulation
Yes,
for
yes.
helping.
Yeah.
The
So,
message
for
to be
example,
sent.
recently I gave my video archive to the Australian Centre for the Moving Image.
Oh, nice.
And my video archive goes from black and white open reel Sony Portapack video to every video format until the digital video now, right? So it's like the history of video from the beginnings of consumer video. And the reason why I decided to give my archive to the centre was that they would be able to digitise everything. They would be able to give me a digital copy
Okay.
of all of my performances, and they would also archive the original video in their centre, you know, because, you know, they have to keep it in stable conditions, at the right temperature, and so on.
Yeah.
If I did not give my archive, my videotapes would deteriorate and they would not be able to be digitized anymore.
So in some perspective, you are also looking as an artist for adaptation. You will be happy to see your elder works to be digitalized, to be more modern.
Well, I think they have to be. It's not so much that they'll be more modern, but they'll be media that can be seen in the hardware that we have now, you know.
When this will end, in your perspective? When it will be a need to end this? Because first we were using floppies, then we started to use DVDs.
Sure. It's
right,
never
CDs.
ending.
Yeah.
I mean, every 3 or 4 years, for example, DVDs and CD-ROMs are completely obsolete now.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you use a USB stick, a USB flash drive,
Yeah.
but in fact, even then, now we're streaming everything, you know. I sent my videos.
On clouds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This becomes a kind of a. It becomes not only is it a problem now of archiving, the problem is once you are sending your digital copies, actually they're digital originals. I mean, there's no difference between a
Yes.
copy and the original.
Absolutely.
So, for example, Venelin requested, "Oh, can I keep the videos that you sent me because I would like to use it with my teaching?" And I said, "Fine." But the disadvantage to the artist is he is no longer the owner, and he is, in this case, the artist, his performance is no longer, financially supportive, you know. So all of my projects and performances, the artist takes the risk. The artist often funds his own projects, supports his own projects, but in the end, he's no longer the owner.
Yeah, that's why I see it as, you see, you have physical machines, you have engine behind your works, like real metal structures
Yeah.
that are huge, that need to be stocked somewhere, that takes physical space.
Yes.
And we are still already 30 minutes talking about the digital part of it.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that we are going too much, we as a society, we are going too much on the digital side. What you say, we are losing the control behind
Yes.
archiving this
Yes.
stuff. You
Yeah.
already mentioned it, even
Yes.
the internet, it's
Yeah.
completely out of control
Yeah.
from that perspective. So yeah, there is no anymore original, this is clear. But in
you
your
know,
case, you have the machines still, right?
No, well, that's right. I mean, all of my physical performance objects that you saw, and some of them are interactive robots. All of these, you know, are still not in collections. The artist doesn't benefit. So, you know, as a full-time performance artist, my financial situation is very, very precarious. You know, sometimes I have money, sometimes I don't. It's very difficult. And, you know, you want to participate in events like Darfest, or in to go to Skopje, or to even to Thessaloniki. But there's no, I mean, of course I get pay, but not a lot of money, you know.
Yeah.
So you want to participate in such a festival because people here are really interested, and they're struggling to do an interesting media arts festival, and so you want to participate. You want to help them, and you want people. I've never been to Sofia before,
Yeah.
but it's not for the money, and it's not enough to pay the artists for their travel and for their accommodation,
Yeah.
because how do they earn their living?
Yeah.
Now, this is a problem with most artists and many curators, because they're not working for big museums, or they're interested in contemporary art, media art, and so consequently these are alternate organisations. They're not big and very rich organisations, and they depend on sponsorship. We were hoping to do a performance here, but finally we couldn't get enough funding, you know.
Yeah.
So this was disappointing, but I understand the situation. So I think it's a problem too now of that museums, art galleries, and directors of art galleries, and directors of festivals, large festivals, they have to consider that the artist is producing the content,
Yeah.
and the artist should be rewarded in a better way. I was talking before about Ars Electronica. So Ars Electronica became bigger and bigger and bigger, and for example, they invited me to do a performance this year in Ars Electronica, and I said, great, I would love to perform, and here is what the equipment I will need. We have to send some equipment from Australia, and this is my performance fee. And it's not huge money, you know, 5,000 euros for a performance fee for a major performance for Ars Electronica, which is a big, you know. And they wrote back and they said, oh, sorry, your budget is too high. And well, that's reasonable, but then I find out that they're actually having too many.
Exactly.
Ars Electronica has become too big, and some other friends who participated this year and last year said, oh, we couldn't get any good technical support. We couldn't get enough because everyone is finding it too difficult. But you know, I had a talk with Galina, and I said that it's wonderful that DAFest is continuing and it's continuing strong. But I said, please remember, it's not the quantity of artists, but please consider the quality of artists. Because if for example, Ars Electronica, I got a message from them and they said, oh, Ars Electronica was very successful this year. 300 artists were exhibited. So many people attended. So they were like box ticking quantitatively how much they presented. Instead of saying, oh, there was a wonderful performance by this artist, or we had a great exhibition. No, it was how many people, numbers. how many artists. This is crazy. So anyway, I said to Galina, please don't get bigger and bigger, get better and better. And this means that you have to reward the artists, because the artists are producing the content, and there will always be interesting artists. So if I cannot perform this year, I could perform next year, or you know. But this is really a serious consideration, I think.
Yeah, and it goes very much with the structure of our society. Recently, there is one wonderful book called, I will translate as an adaptation. It's from Mahmoud Roza, and it's overspeeding. So the society is really overspeeding in that perspective, in all the possible spheres, obviously here as well. I will bring you back a little bit when we started to talk about the machines. So on one perspective, you have this wonderful engine character of your pieces that lives there in boxes, as you said. So they're one part of you as an artist. Then we have you, which we can move. Like we said, please go to the plane, come to Sofia. Your machines are in Melbourne, you are here without them. Then we have also the digital or collective social memory that we will remember, like I'm recording right now. People came in the morning, they will talk about you for quite some time, because as
one
you
or
said,
2 nights.
No. You are for the first time in Sofia, and it's a huge thing actually. And a lot of people were writing to me, does he really comes? Like they thought that maybe we will make a trick and we will just show a Skype presentation or something. And they couldn't believe. I saw some of the faces yesterday here. So it looks like the body is really, the body of the artist in your case, it's really wrapped up, like according to Derrida, you know, this kind of wrapping up, destructurized. The piece of art is completely destructurized, is decomposite. And my last question, I want to go deeper into this, is where is the semantic when everything is decomposed in that perspective? Because the semantic can be in the collective memory, the semantic can be in the most important part of your engines, like people who helped you to build the machines, the first moment when the idea came, the process of searching how to build the ear, for example, how to make the structure, all the planning process. And what I miss from the digital recording that nowadays we call an archive is exactly the semantic. So where is the heart of the piece of the art? Is it you? When you're obsolete, is it going to be kept?
No, I think it's an excellent question, but in terms of the history of art, right? In the end, it's the artwork that is collected and protected, and allowing people, not only in one generation but in future generations, to appreciate that artwork, right? But by the way, there are different kinds of approaches to art. So, for example, a lot of art is kind of better suited to museum or art gallery archives. In other words, if it's a certain kind of artwork, a beautiful artwork, a large artwork, and so on, these are collected as kind of examples of commodified art. But the other kind of artwork is artwork that generates further ideas, that generates philosophical consideration. So, for example, although none of my artworks are collected in Australia, or very few, mostly not, so much of my work is written in books on performance or media art. So my artwork is disseminated in that way. It's not disseminated within the museum, you know. But it's also partly the nature of the artwork, which is performance. And interestingly, when my financial situation was really bad 7 or 8 years ago, I thought, well, okay, now is the time to sell all of my objects. So we wrote letters to different art galleries, and there was absolutely no interest. And some of the letters that replied were, well, you know, it's kind of interesting work, but the objects that you want to sell, they're not art, they're performance objects. They're not artworks in themselves.
Oh my God.
So that was interesting because, of course, the only way my performances will continue to exist in some way is images, video, and objects. And if the museums don't collect the objects, I think this is because the object gives really some good idea of the sophistication of the technology, of how it was connected to the body and so on. So this was very interesting, that there was no desire to archive the performance objects.
It's hard to imagine that somebody really thinks it's not enough to be collected.
Yeah.
Because for me, even the hand per se, it's aesthetic.
Yeah. Yes.
I really enjoyed just looking at it. I would love, of course, to see the performance as well, but just see the hand, it's very nice.
And interesting, over the last 10 years, there have been requests to exhibit the third hand, or the extended arm, or the walking robot, kind of as sort of part of the history of the cyborg stuff, right? Yeah. So these have been shown in museums, but museums haven't expressed an interest to acquire them.
In curator exhibitions, I assume, so they try to build the history context.
Yeah.
Yes. To show it as a part of the happenings, of the timeline.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, but these pieces, the sculpture, it can exist on its own. It can has a separate life.
Yes.
The robot, the walking head also. Probably the only piece that can't have a separate life is the ear.
Oh no, we can cut it off if we want.
Okay, this probably neither one museum will want.
If someone gives me a lot of money, they can have the arm and the ear.
Don't get it so easy. I suggest we can go for the restaurant, so to
Yes,
not
that would be good. I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, but still I will keep recording
Yeah,
there as
if you
well.
wish, yeah.
But just in case if something good comes out.
Sure.